You're
You ready, aren't
listening
you?
to
Oh, I'm
We
doing
are
it?
ready. Yeah, I was gonna say, we're already recording. So and honestly, I don't even want you to edit this out because
No,
this
fuck
is
it.
just this is what happens when Brett isn't here.
Tired, so tired, overtired.
You're listening to Overtired. I'm Christina Warren, joined by Jeff Severance Gunsel, former MSNBC star Jeff Severance Gunsel. We're
Yeah,
gonna have that
yeah.
linked in the show notes.
They gave Chris Hayes my spot.
I mean, honestly, you were robbed. Because I really I would have rather watched you with your indignant like consternation at the pro Bush guy.
I sent my co-hosts a video from 2003 in the lead up to the Iraq War, and I had been working with an anti-war organization and had been traveling back and forth to Iraq before that, before we knew there would ever even be any kind of war. Couldn't even imagine. And I got to go on TV to be a person who has gone back and forth to Iraq. And this was an MSNBC appearance that was so incredibly unsatisfying, as those things I'm sure always are for anybody who truly cares about what they're saying. It isn't just doing it because it's their job, which is another kind of
Yep.
fun. But the thing that I we'll link to this, but as I look at that younger me, that like baby me, the two things I noticed that I still relate to is this sort of brooding stare, a little bit down, but not all the way down. And then I'm swiveling back and forth in my chair.
That,
But
yes,
it was
yeah.
that stuff was so hard for me because the TV and radio wanted to talk about the politics of it and the optics of it and all of that
Right.
stuff. And like, as someone who had been traveling back and forth to Iraq, primarily from 1998 to 2001, but then still worked for an organization that sent people to Iraq, like it was like, this wasn't a good soundbite, but like,
Right.
I don't want this war because I don't want my friends to die.
Right. No,
Like,
that's the thing. But you were actually you were actually concerned about the people on the ground, which is the part that people claim to care about, but it's the thing that gets the least amount of attention. Like you'll have your one-off
right.
stories, profiling this or that thing, and people will read it and like, oh, this is terrible, and move on. But it's always framed in like the larger geopolitical terms, which on the one hand makes sense because I think if you had to focus on those smaller things, it would just be impossible to watch and impossible to even kind of grapple with who we are as humanity when we do these things, right? So you have to, I think, take a big picture approach if you're going to talk about it at all. But B, it would also just be is like, if you're not there, it's really hard to get those individual things out. But that is the price we pay. And now we are, the 20th anniversary was what, like 2 weeks ago?
Yeah. Yep. And we're almost on the 20th anniversary of when I arrived there after the invasion for my final trip there.
We might have talked about this before, and if we did, I apologize for asking you again, but what was it like? How did you get into doing the work where you were going there?
It's a really funny, weird story. So I had been in a punk rock band called the Freedom Fighters, which was not a terribly political band. But our one political song we played in LA to a very small audience, and Zach De La Roca was in the audience from Rage Against the Machine. And we had this one kind of obtuse political song. And when it was over, it was a great song. When it was over, he screamed out in approval, and it sounded just like a scream from the record. And I was just like, that's pretty cool. That was kind of neat. It was like we sampled him. Anyway, so I was in this punk rock band, and I had been sort of having like a political awakening since like age 8. And somehow the years of being in bands, and I worked in a lot of warehouses and dishwashed and all this stuff, like I was starting to really feel the absence of something that felt truly meaningful to me as like how I spent my time. And I was starting to think about leaving the band and just, I didn't know what, but the one thing it seemed like you could do is like travel to places that have political relevance. And I had that kind of in my mind, but I didn't have a high school diploma. I hadn't gone to college at all. It's just like I had a good head on my shoulders, but like I had to find ways of demonstrating that, which I didn't really know. I was super shy. I barely looked adults in the eye in this period of time. But anyway, so we're touring and we went to a newsstand. Remember those? Lots
I
of
vaguely,
magazines.
yeah.
So many
Yep.
magazines.
I love them so much.
I bought a magazine called Covert Action Quarterly, which is an awesome name. It's like a lefty magazine that's traditionally looked at the covert work of United States agents, but also globally. I'd never heard of it. I was like, this is a badass title. And that's what was so great about newsstands, right? Is you could just be like, what is that? I'm
Well, I
buying
was gonna say you
that.
could like discover all these things. Like for me, I missed like a lot of, I guess, I mean, there was like the news section of like the supermarket, but it wasn't until I first went into like a Barnes and Noble that I got
Yeah,
kind of like the equivalent,
right,
you
right,
know?
right. Totally. Yeah, I mean, they still do that. Like I was in a Barnes and Noble for the first time in a while the other day, and there was a long run of magazines. The problem is magazines, the ones that have survived they survived because they're ad based. And
Yeah,
so you get these like just a million glossy magazines where every single, headline and sub headline is meant to serve the advertisers, and it's just boring. And whereas in the olden days, you would be like, what the fuck is Covert Action Quarterly? So,
totally,
so
because
that
you could have all kinds of
magazine,
classified ads and other things. Like it didn't just have to be
yeah,
the big glossies. You could, like they were
totally.
still advertising based. It's just the internet hadn't completely either collapsed that form of revenue or changed it substantially.
Yeah, and the distributors would take your little magazine because they had a million big magazines. It wasn't a
Right.
big deal for them. Um, but anyhow, so it's also called CAQ. It had a cover story about Iraq, and it was kind of this would have been like 1998. And so in 1991, 7 years earlier, there was the Gulf War. I was 16 when that happened. Unexplainable to me. I was fascinated and completely attached to that war. I would skip school to watch it on CNN. It, of course, was like famously the first war to be broadcast 24
Yep.
hours, 7 days a week. And I would watch it. And when I couldn't watch it, I would, tape it. I would set the VCR to tape it, and then I watch it later. And I wasn't at all it wasn't like a war fetish. It was like, oh my God, we're the stuff that we normally do that we can't see, we can see. It was just fascinating. It would be a theme of my career,
Mhm.
like just like light in the dark corners, like, oh, we can go over here and see what's over here. And you could see this war. And I mean, a highly sanitized version of the war, but you could see the war. Um, and I had been completely obsessed with it and then forgot about it. And this magazine was basically, it had a feature that was kind of telling the story of 1991 to present. And it was the story of these economic sanctions that we had placed on Iraq with international support. And the way it basically went down is in the Gulf War, we very deliberately destroyed all of Iraq's critical infrastructure with bombs, or most of it, with the idea that when the war was over, we would put economic sanctions on Iraq, and Saddam Hussein would have to, kind of abide by those sanctions in order for us to allow him to import things to fix water treatment plants, phone exchanges, power plants, all that stuff. And turned out Saddam Hussein's pretty stubborn, and the US is pretty stubborn, and so it just became this like like Cold War, not Cold War, but it wasn't a hot war, right? And people
Right.
were still suffering. People were, I mean, what I was reading about in Covert Action Quarterly was a Harvard study group that went to Iraq, and they had gone because there were all of these reports coming out of the UN that especially children and young and old people were suffering from the fact that there were these decrepit, totally out of date water treatment facilities held together with like duct tape and wire, and that meant there was a lot of dirty water going through the system, and that meant that people were drinking it. And when you drink bad water and you're a kid or you're elderly, it can really, really do damage. It can kill you. And there was a UNICEF report that came out that said 5,000 children under the age of 5 were dying every month that would not have otherwise been dying based on mortality statistics, and that this was entirely due to the fact that Iraq's water system was what it was and the hospital system was what it was. So like I had to bring in like medical journals for doctors because of the sanctions they couldn't get mailed in. So it was like a really serious thing. And so I'm reading this, and I'm like, my God, I totally forgot about this place. And as it turns out, we've been doing far worse to it in the last 7 years than we did in the war itself. And I learned in that magazine about an organization that was like sending delegations of activists to Iraq with bags of medicine and other things that aren't allowed in, and doing it as an act of civil disobedience, which they could then use when they get back home as sort of a news hook and start and talk to people about the effects of the sanctions. So this movement was like, it grew out of nothing. And it was mostly this one organization out of Chicago that was sending activists there. And then those activists were coming home and kind of doing some lobbying, but also, talking to other activist groups or whatever, trying to make it an issue, which was really hard. And so I saw the name of this organization that they were in Chicago, that they sent people to Iraq, and there was this woman, Kathy Kelly, who led the organization. And I just thought, I have friends in Chicago. It'd be cool to drive there and meet this woman. And so I emailed her in the early days for me of email, and said I'd love to just meet you and hear about the work or whatever. I read about it in Covert Action Quarterly, and she invited me out to Chicago. Turns out she runs this thing out of her house, or her second floor of a house that she rents in Chicago. In the back room of this house was her father, who was bedridden and barely verbal. And in the midway between the living room and where her father was and the kitchen was like a bay of like 5 PCs, and people at each one of the PCs doing just kind of clickety clacking away. And she invited me to sit down in the living room, and we talked for like 2 hours. And at the end of it, she was like, "So do you want to go to Iraq?" And I totally didn't see that coming. But at the same time, I mean, they were just sending activists. I don't mean just, but I mean, like, anyone can be an activist and go, like,
right.
As long as you decide you are. And I decided pretty quickly that I wanted to go. And so in 1998, I quit my band. We had like one final show scheduled for after my trip to Iraq, but I went to Iraq having only ever been to Jamaica out of the country. And it was the most bizarre, hard left turn I can possibly imagine. And I can trace everything that's true in my life today and good in my life today back to Kathy's decision to be like, "Yeah, you seem like a good guy. You want to go to Iraq?" And so the idea was, the whole like premise of these trips was like 5 or 6 people go, you bring all this stuff that's banned by sanctions, you do a press conference. We had a letter from the Treasury Department saying like anybody who travels to Iraq risks it was like $1 million and 12 years in jail. That was like the kind of the scare letter. And so we would hold a press conference in the US and say, here's the letter. Here's what we've been, thank you for the clarity of your warning. And we're going anyway because we believe da. And so we would go, and then we'd hold another press conference once we were in Baghdad at a hospital usually. I came home from that trip. It was about 2 weeks trip. I came home and like, this is all I wanted to do. Like, it's all I could think about. And so I actually ended up moving in to Kathy's apartment. One other employee of the place was already living there. Her apartment was this amazing, just sort of like Grand Central Station of eccentric characters. And so I started to help organizing these things. Then pretty soon I was like, I really want to go back and lead a delegation, and maybe I could live there and just welcome delegations. And what ended up happening was like between that trip in October of 98 and August of 2001. So like just days actually before the 9/11 attacks, I made like 10 or 11 trips to Iraq, always through Amman, Jordan. In fact, I've probably said this in the podcast, but this impossible to explain how this ended up being true. But I came through Chicago O'Hare having been to Iraq in August of 2001, carrying a duffel bag of Iraqi money and fireworks. And they were like, "Welcome back."
Like, did you have fun? Hope you had a good time.
I mean, like a duffel bag full of bound Iraqi money, because the like economy was so shattered,
right,
that I could trade $100 for a backpack full of bills,
right?
So yeah, I always tell people that, like, how different it was before. Like, yeah, we didn't have to take off our shoes and all that shit, but
it was really that different. No, that's so interesting. But so this is amazing. So basically, Rage Against the Machine was at one of your, concerts.
Same tour as when I found that magazine. Yeah,
screamed out. Then like you see this magazine, you're like, I want to do that. You reach out, You wind up meeting somebody involved in this organization, and it changes your whole life.
Yeah, and I mean, so and there's a direct line to journalism. So like I did that work for quite a while, but at the end of that organization's work, at least when I was there, we started actually being able to, like, I took a journalist from Rolling Stone to
Mm-hmm.
Iraq, right? Like his piece ended up getting spiked from Rolling Stone and published in Mother Jones for some reason. But like, anyway,
Mm-hmm.
this guy, Chuck Sudetich, who had also covered the war in Yugoslavia in like the worst, most awful way. So I took a journalist, I took editors, I took like an AP journalist, I took congressional staffers, right? Like, so all of a sudden, like, I'm not just rolling around with like other dirty hippies like me.
No, because at this point now you're the dirty hippie who can like show them stuff because
That's right.
because now you can like show like even the Rolling Stone guy by 1998, that's he's in a suit, he's getting paid
Yeah,
real well,
totally.
got paid a nice kill fee and got another nice fee from Mother Jones, right? Like,
Totally.
you're taking like these like high on the hog kind of people to show them this is what's actually happening on the ground,
Yep.
because you want to help promote like your mission of the organization of hey, this is what the sanctions have done, this is what the impact of what's
Yes.
happening here is, and
Yes.
and then they're like, well, this is great that I have an American, and maybe I won't get shot now or whatever, because I don't speak Farsi, and I'm not gonna like know where to get started on anything,
Yeah, no,
and
Arabic. Nobody spoke
Arabic, yeah.
Arabic. Like, I spoke enough to order my food. The thing is, I probably would have learned much more Arabic, but because um Americans were not coming to Iraq because it was illegal, um everyone wanted to practice their English,
Right.
and that was cool because I'm traditionally terrible at learning languages, so it was like kind of nice actually to have that going on. But yeah, I mean, it's like and the process of taking journalists started to change me because I really believe in and believed in our mission as an activist organization doing these fact-finding missions. But what I often found with people who came along is that they came along with the story they were going to find already in their mind.
Of course.
And of course you could outline what the story was, but you don't actually know. And when you come with the story in mind, you're rigid and you're not open, you're not porous for new information.
No, if anything, like you're looking for anything that fits in with that pattern.
Yes. Yeah, totally. And like one of the things that started, there were two journalists that I went with that impacted the rest of my life. So the first was Chuck Sudetich, who was this totally hard scrabble. I mean, this guy, in doing his work in Yugoslavia, in rushing to a story, had run over and killed a kid with his motorcycle. I mean, he just, in addition to having seen some of the worst things in the world,
Fuck.
he was dealing with this shit, right? And
Yeah.
he was hard. I mean, it was like, he was awesome. He was funny. He's the most brilliant person I've ever met. But what he did that was so helpful is, as an activist organization, basically saying, hey, these sanctions are killing the vulnerable. The thing that those delegations would typically do is go from hospital to hospital to hospital. But the problem is, if you haven't really thought through how you're going to be in those places, then you could do a lot of damage. And so
Yeah.
I had to pull people out of hospital rooms because they would go in with the doctor and there'd be a woman and her child was like emaciated. It was like dying. It looked awful. Right. And this is way before I was a parent. So it would have hit a whole different way had I been a parent. But like, the doctor is telling you all sorts of things in English about this kid and maybe about this mom. In most cases, they did not speak English. And so they're watching this doctor say all kinds of words to us. And some people are starting to cry and shaking their heads and all that stuff. And it's like, hey, this woman doesn't know what's going on. Like, for all we know, this doctor has been a shit doctor and has not said anything about prognosis or anything like that because maybe he just never developed a language for having that kind of relationship with a patient. You never know. Or maybe he's amazing, but like, let's just assume that she is underinformed like anybody sitting in a hospital ever, right?
Right.
You cannot start crying and shaking your head because it is
No.
going to cause a response in her. It might be anger and it
Right.
might be fear and it might be sadness, it might be all kinds of things that we don't even have the right to try to understand because we're not her, we're not there.
Right.
And so I went from that kind of thing where I would kind of pull people out to like then training people about how to be in
you would see
hospitals
people, so people would actually cry like in the room, like they would be
and shake their head. That's the part that was actually, they would look at the mother and just make a contact, well-meaning, of course, but intentions, as we know, are not magic, especially when there's a language barrier in a fascist state where you don't trust anything anyhow, right? Like, and so eventually I really wanted to just stop going to so many hospitals because it just felt like we know this story, and I don't know that we do. I don't think we do more good than bad when we go, you know?
Yeah. I was gonna say, at a certain point, once you started bringing people, did you notice that like the stories all stayed the same? Was that maybe?
Well, yeah, and
I'm
sometimes
getting
the
ahead of you,
stories,
but like, was
no,
that maybe what encouraged you to maybe um, get into journalism?
sort of. I mean, what happened that was so disturbing. I mean, actually, the first press conference I was part of on my first trip, we were out in front of a hospital, and a man and a woman, as the like AP cameras were rolling, a man and a woman came out of the door behind us with what looked like a baby covered in a blanket, and they were crying and they were saying something, I don't know what, and they got into a Jeep and just like sped off, and the cameras followed it, and it was like, and what we came to realize as we kind of reflected on it is that was very possibly not actually a dead child. Like that was very possibly just like a media manipulation, you know? And that was like my first trip, my first day. And that alone kind of changed me for a long time. It was just like trying to think about why it might have been that happened and how they may have been made to do that. You know, and they may have had no choice whatsoever. And maybe that was an actual child. I mean, it's not to get super disturbing, but like it's a dictatorship, right? So like you never know what's true. You never know what's true.
Right.
And so anyway, so it's like two things acting now that I think about it. On the one hand, you come with a predetermined story. On the other hand, you don't know
You
what's
can't trust
true.
anything. Yeah.
And there's this third part where you've got to figure out a way to see things that might be true so that you can tell a more nuanced story. It's a fucking mess. But like the thing that Chuck Sudetich did for me that was so great is we had a couple days of just hard interviews in hard places, the way that a journalist like him would do. And then he said to me one morning, we were roommates, he would sing Delia by Johnny Cash in the shower. Um, and one morning he goes, "We're not going to any hospitals today." I was like, "Okay, what are we doing?" He's like, "We're going to the museum." He's like, "This place is not just victims. Like this place is a country full of living, breathing, hearts beating people. It's an incredible culture. It's not, the story is not just one of victimhood, and we do everybody a disservice by insisting that that's how you have to receive it." And that was huge for me, and just absolutely huge. And the second thing that made a big difference for me in getting into journalism was that I traveled with an editor for a small newspaper in Kansas, and he and I got along so well. And he kind of became a mentor to me even after that trip, and told me like, you should be a journalist. That's how your head works. And so when the invasion happened, I called him about a weekend and I said, "I can't stand it anymore, Tom. I need to go over there." And I said, "I know I can't be a journalist exactly, but I also know that I know a lot about what it was and am better situated to see what it is. And to be frank, and maybe this is the story, I want to connect with the people I love and care about and find out what's happened for them since this war began." And this was a very different time in journalism because this editor of a small newspaper said, "Give me 15 minutes," and then called me back and he said, "You got an interpreter?" And I had a friend, a Palestinian, Mahassan, Palestinian friend who lived in East Jerusalem. And we'd already traveled to Iraq together. And so I'm like, "Yeah, I can get Mahassan." And he's like, "All right, get a satellite phone and buy your tickets. I'm sending you to Iraq." Which was just like such a kindness. I mean, he was thinking of
Yeah.
his paper, but it was still a kindness. And
No, it
he
totally
knew
was. And he had
Yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah.
they had budgets for it then, right? Like that's the biggest
Yes.
difference.
Yeah, in 15 minutes, he was like, grab an interpreter, get her to Baghdad, get yourself to Baghdad, get a satellite phone, which is not cheap. I mean, you rent them,
No.
but like, oh my God,
Right.
not cheap by the minute. And then go find a hotel, which was, I went to the hotel I had always stayed at, and there had always been this African gray parrot in the restaurant. And one of the restaurant workers who I'd come to know really well had trained it to make gun sounds, but also if you made gun sounds, to duck. It would duck in all these directions. It was amazing. And so I roll up to Baghdad. There's fucking Americans everywhere. After all of my time there being one of 5 Americans in the country at a time, right? Like I was definitely not novel anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And in the lobby of the hotel, there were soldiers playing with that bird. And when I went to the desk and talked to a friend there, the hotel was full anyhow. The prices were so high because they were rightly bilking the American military because we didn't have like a
Right.
proper base yet. So it's like soldiers are just staying. I mean, this is like unbelievable to think about because it became so dangerous to be a soldier there. But at this point, you just saw them walking around. They were like chilling in the restaurants, whatever. In fact, what caused me to leave this place so I did find a hotel, by the way, which was in the lobby. They had actually welded in this floor to ceiling grate with a door in it, and they would lock you into the hotel at the end of each night because there had been looting and other stuff. And so it's just like, and they had stacked bricks outside all the windows.
Right.
It was a trip. But anyway, so why I ended up leaving, because I intended to stay for a while, but I left only after 2 weeks, was I went to my favorite restaurant and I was sitting in a booth with Mahasan and my friend Rasak, who's Iraqi. And across the restaurant were 3 booths full of American soldiers. Their 2 Humvees took up like 6 spots in the restaurant in front in the parking lot area. And I had just returned. I was there with an Iraqi, and a woman soldier came to our table after staring at us for a while, extended her hand, and said, "Welcome to Iraq." And it's like there aren't many better metaphors to the way, like where our head was at as a country and as a military when we got to Iraq. Like, who are you saying welcome to? Me, who's been here a million fucking times? This guy who's lived here his whole life? This
Right.
woman who's been here a million times? Like, welcome. What the fuck are you talking about? And so I got so distracted by watching her and the soldiers that I ate a kebab of mostly raw chicken in a restaurant that had been having power outages on and off like everybody else for a week. And I got salmonella. And I was shitting blood for a week, maybe more, 2 weeks, I think. And it was best for me to go home.
And
And
so you ended up leaving right before it would have been very difficult for you to leave the Middle
actually,
East.
yeah, here's what's really wild is, I mean, it's awful, but in my last days there, maybe my last day or second to last day, there was a bridge outside my window. I didn't see this, but it was close to where I was. And at that bridge was a soldier just chilling, because soldiers were just chilling everywhere. They were just like lounging on their tanks. There weren't a lot of them in the first place. Like I expected many more. I mean, we saw how that ended up being not a great thing, even though I was opposed to the invasion itself. They're lounging, talking to kids, talking to people, whatever. But on one of these days, a guy walks up to a soldier on a bridge from behind and shoots him in the back of the head. And from that point on, it was a slow march to just total resistance to the American occupation. But like, that was like this like canary in the coal mine moment. And I've never been back. And that sucks. But it's going back means, I mean, I said this in a recent episode where it's like, I don't feel like I can go back without causing harm to the people I would want to see. So
Which,
be self-indulgent.
yeah, no, I mean, and that's really, really hard. Okay, that Actually, I loved that. I loved that entire segment. There's no good way to now go into a sponsor read, but we are at that time and we need to do a sponsor read. I will say, I think that counted as mental health corner, but also as like our
Yeah,
interviewee,
right.
one another segment. That was actually
Right.
but I love that whole thing. I love like I mean, it's terrible to kind of hear about that the end of that experience, but to see how you taken a chance and how old were you? I guess you were. How old were you when you first started getting involved with this in '98? How old were you in '98? You were like
Oh, in
21,
'98, I was like 22. Yeah,
22.
23.
So
Yeah,
22, 23. So just amazing. All
yeah.
right. I did just because
Let's hit it.
all right. Our show this week is brought to you by Collide. Our sponsor Collide has some big news. If you're an Okta user, they can get your entire fleet to 100% compliance. How? Well, if a device is not compliant, the user can't log in to your cloud apps until they fix the problem. It's that simple. So Collide patches one of the major holes in zero trust architecture, which is device compliance. And without Collide, IT struggles to solve basic problems like keeping everyone's OS and browser up to date. Like Mac OS just released an update this week and, Patch Tuesday for Windows. And unsecured devices are logging into your company's apps because there's nothing there to stop them. Collide is the only device trust solution that enforces compliance as part of authentication, and it's built to work seamlessly with Okta. The moment Collide's agent detects a problem, it alerts the user and gives them instructions to fix it. And if they don't fix the problem within a set time, they're blocked. They're blocked. Collide's method means fewer support tickets, less frustration, and most importantly, 100% fleet compliance. You can visit collide.com/overtired to learn more or book a demo. That's KOLIDE.com/overtired, collide.com/overtired.
Boom. All right. We've been talking about this podcast a few episodes now, the Mental Chillness Podcast. If you are looking for more mental health podcasts, can you have too many? Probably. But if you're looking for more, Mental Chillness is a safe space that heals with the power of laughter. It's led by Con and Jules, two people with mental illness that come together weekly with occasional guests to share their daily processes of working towards mental chillness. Coming from childhood environments that were not open about mental well-being and emotional self-regulation, Con and Jules are opening up the conversations of the everyday struggles of dealing with ADHD, depression and anxiety, epilepsy, and growing into adulthood. They share tips and tricks of emotional awareness from their personal experiences and how they hold themselves accountable through personal BS. Personal BS. That'd be a good book title. I'm
I
your
like it.
personal BS. And the way they know how to do it best is with humor, and you could keep up with them on any podcast platform and the YouTube channel Mental Chillness for full video chillness content. Thank you, Mental Chillness.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So,
what now?
I was just gonna say, okay, it's just to kind of back up a little bit before we kind of got into the Christina and Jeff interview each other thing, and I really like that. I loved hearing
Yeah,
about
it's fun.
your journey into this, and it's so interesting. You should write a book. You really should.
I hear that, and I just don't know how to. I've tried. Go ahead. Though.
We'll think on it. You might just need somebody else to help you frame it but there is a book in here. Like I know it. There's a book in here.
Yeah.
Like I know that I have some sort of memoir at some point. And I know the angles that would be sellable, but those aren't necessarily the ones I want to do. And then I don't know. There was one that would have been really good, and then I waited too long, and someone else stole my title, and or close enough to my title. My title was slightly better, and so that sucks.
Yeah.
Because the title I had was fucking perfect.
You can't say it, can you? Because
no, I can because it's basically been stolen, and that book is coming out at some point, and I'm not even going to read it because I'm so mad. I'm mad at myself, to be clear, because I had years to sit on this and to pitch this, and I didn't. How to Be a Woman on the Internet.
Oh, that's a great title.
Right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Wait, what's the one that's close?
How to Be a Woman Online is coming out. That's not as good. I'm going to be honest. It's not as good.
Yeah. It needs the hardness of the word internet.
It does.
Yeah.
But regardless, I can't now pitch a book called How to Be a Woman on the Internet when a book was sold called How to Be a Woman Online.
What about How to Be a Woman on the World Wide Web?
Ha! But I
There's always
wanted it to
that.
be like part memoir, part kind of like essay kind of thing about like, like I even knew how I was going to open it. I was afraid to pitch. Honestly, that's the real truth of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Always
um
afraid to pitch.
but like I was afraid to like do the, send out stuff and to send out like the agent, letters and other stuff. I was afraid to pitch. I was afraid of getting turned down. So I
Yeah.
didn't do it, which sucks because no offense to the How to Be a Woman Online thing, but if that's the title that you chose when a much better one is right there on the cusp of what you're doing, I don't have super high hopes for the book. I know that's unfair, and part of that is sour grapes on my part. And but it is. But I said what I said. Just like
Do you
when
think
an
it's one of those
objectively
things?
sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say when an objectively better title is right there, I'm gonna immediately be judgmental of you for not picking it, as angry as I
Yeah.
still am at myself.
What if it's, here's what I wonder. So I'm watching the White Lotus for the first time.
So good.
And yeah, there's a point in the like third episode where the kid loses his Switch, his Nintendo Switch. And when he comes home and is yelling about it, he yells, "I lost my Nintendo." And I thought, that's not what he would have said. But then I realized someone probably edited that to be like, no, you can't say Switch. It doesn't make sense. No one knows what that is. They got to say Nintendo. Everyone knows Nintendo. Just like when he was playing it, he basically was playing Smash Brothers, but based on his like Smash Bros.
Right.
But like they were literally just giving occasional sounds from Mario, but not like Mario's fighting. It was just,
Right.
it's funny. It's funny to me at this point in the history of gaming that those things can happen. Right.
I
Like,
agree. Although it's funny because I wonder how much of that is like a post-production rights thing, because Nintendo is like notoriously,
oh, that's a good
weird
point.
about that stuff, right? And so, there might have been like because you have like the actual paid product placement, which is usually not people saying the product name. And it's funny because people think that, oh, you have to cover up the Apple logo. No, you don't. It's just they cover it up because they're not getting paid to show it. That's
Yeah,
typically
right.
what happens. You can show the brand logos all you want, as long as you're not doing something derogatory with the product. The companies don't care. And even then you could argue it's like a fair use thing, unless it's the subject of what you're doing, right? Like that it's a very clear thing. But most TV shows and things don't want to give free publicity. HBO and things like that are different because they want to go for the realism. But Apple does do product placement in a number of things, and even before Apple TV, like you could see that happening places where you're like, wow, every
Yeah.
single person has an iPhone or an iMac or this or that, and in just this like stunning way that just doesn't. And that it's promotional consideration. It's not necessarily a product placement, but I do wonder, like
Right.
Nintendo being as weird as they are, if they would be a thing where they're like, okay, we can use the Switch because this is enough of a known thing. But if we use the Smash music, we have to clear that. And Nintendo's not going to clear it for this show.
Right. Yeah. Which is crazy. I guess it wouldn't have been a big deal at the time, but it is still an HBO show. But yeah, I can see
it's
that
White Lotus.
completely.
I mean, like, let's think of the subject matter. That's not going to be like I mean, Nintendo is they're freaks anyway. Like
Yeah,
there are
that's a good
people who
point.
like they send takedown notices to YouTubers who are literally doing nothing but promoting their thing, and they're like, no, we don't like game streams. Why?
I guess
we
it's
don't
kind of in a
control the whole
way.
thing.
You've flipped me to the point where I feel like it's amazing that they let the Switch be there at all.
Well, that's kind of how I was feeling when you were talking about it.
Yeah.
It's so funny because that was my first thing. I was like, shit. I'm actually impressed that they even like didn't, because you do see sometimes they'll have like fake devices and fake things, but again, that's usually not because you legally have to, but because they don't want to give free publicity to stuff.
Yeah.
But like I did this deep dive a few months ago where there's this guy Quentin Reviews on YouTube who does like these exhaustive like multi-hour videos, and he's done like this many hour like digression into iCarly and Victorious, and he's done the first half of Sam and Cat, which was the spinoff of the two shows with two of the characters, and that the first part is 5.5 hours.
Wow. I love it.
I mean, I'm talking about like there's like an 8-hour iCarly video, like there are several of them, like, and I've watched them, and so I learned more about like the Nickelodeon like universe of shows, and like the this particular like universe, like they created this this pear company to be a stand-in for Apple, and they have all these pear devices like the pear pad and the pear phone and the
Yeah, yeah. Like Huli.
like yeah, exactly. But they
Yeah,
actually like created like it's all lives in universe. It's actually kind of funny. I've got to be honest. It is sort of clever to see that stuff. I'm like, okay, you know what?
yeah,
I don't hate that. That's actually, if you're going to like have a commitment to a bit, that's
yep,
interesting. But
yep,
but yeah, that was just a Nickelodeon being like, oh no, we are not giving, Android or Apple or whoever, Motorola or whatever, Samsung, whatever, we're not giving
yeah.
them any free publicity.
Right,
We'll just have
right.
plastic things because we're just going to be, putting the green screen on this in
Totally.
post production anyway.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, totally. That's true. Yeah, 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 for sure. That's interesting. It's interesting. You said this 5 hour digression. I was actually I had a topic kicking around in my mind about like how what things we are able to listen to ad nauseum. Is that what I would say? Like deep dives, like because I just got done doing something that like I don't know anybody could understand this. I
let's talk
listened
about it.
to so Rick Rubin has this podcast. The name
And
of which
you're
is
talking about
slipping
music
my
producer Rick
mind.
Rubin, I'm assuming.
Yes, music
Okay.
producer Rick Rubin. And it's not always him. It's he does it with Malcolm Gladwell, but I don't find Malcolm Gladwell a really interesting music interviewer, where obviously Rick Rubin is.
Right.
Um, and Rick Rubin did this series of interviews. It's 4 1-hour interviews with John Frusciante, the guitarist, on again, off again guitarist of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. An hour with Flea, bass player, of course. An hour with Anthony Kiedis and an hour with Chad Smith. So each of the members of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, a band that like I loved in a time, but
Right.
I can't find the hook in their music now that I found in like Blood Sugar Sex Magic, which is just an incredible record.
Incredible record. You know what? It
Um,
was also a great record, though. I'm going to briefly digress you for just a second. Californication.
so I agree, and in fact, here's actually it's you walked right into what happened to me. So first of all, I could listen to 4, 5, 6, 7 hours of over in a week of interviews with these guys, in part because I love listening to people talk about music in depth because I was in bands and I love music, but also because at a time in my life I really loved this band, and actually they had a huge impact of about how this is kind of interesting, like as like sort of misogynistic as they could be, it both in footage of the band and in the music. Like there was this documentary I watched over and over again that was the making of Blood Sugar Sex Magic back in like 91, 92 with Rick Rubin. And the way that those, especially Anthony Kiedis and Flea, I feel so just don't hate me for talking about these guys as much as I'm about to.
No, no, no,
The
please.
way that they talked about their relationship with one another and their relationship with music was highly feminine, and in terms of like what kind of energy I had around me with bands, and really connected with me. And like they would, I mean, they loved each other, and
Yeah.
they would talk about things about the beauty of music. It was actually kind of hard music, but they would talk about the beauty of it, or they would just use words that weren't being used by the people around me to describe either friendships or music. And that altered me forever. Like it helped ease me into a place that I knew I'd be more comfortable anyhow. And is where I'm at to this day. Like the way that I exclaim about music is still impacted by the way that they exclaimed about music in those days. So I think part of it was I was looking for that and totally found it. Like it's I love listening to these guys talk way more than I love listening to them. But to your point, I wanted just one other album to care about after all this, right? And I started going through them, and I was like, oh, that Californication's a pretty good record.
It's a fucking
And it's
great
really
record.
it's the follow-up to Blood
It
Sugar
is.
Sex Magic because Dave Navarro was the guitar player in between.
Yes,
And
exactly. And look, Dave
yeah,
Navarro was great in his bands. He was not great in the
yes.
Chili Peppers, right?
I
Like
was so sad. I saw the Red Hot Chili Peppers on that tour in Lollapalooza 2, and he was a guitar player. I was so bummed because that John Frusciante is a goddamn prodigy.
I saw
Or
them
was at
at
the
some
time.
I saw them at some festival during the Californication era. And I
Yeah.
loved, I was much younger, but I loved, Blood Sugar Sex Magic and great songs, and that was like their
Yeah.
breakthrough, and I loved the behind the music. on them, which actually came out. I don't think
which
it
I
was
never
even
saw.
tied to Californication. I think it was like a year earlier, weirdly enough. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think it was actually tied, because usually they would time the behind the musics to like a new album release, or some
Yeah.
other sort of moment, right? Which makes sense. At the time, I didn't know that, but now, of course, I do. Um, but as a kid, I didn't know that. But then, like, Californication, like, it came out that summer of '99, and which was a great summer for music. And like peak CD sales, and
Yeah.
that album, just, I still listen to it. Like, that to me, like, it had great singles, and
Yeah.
but all the songs were like, you know, just like, it hits. It's a really good album.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. And it's I didn't realize that the relationship with Rick Rubin just went on for them. And Broken Record is the name of the podcast. I just remembered.
Broken Record. Okay.
Um yeah, and yeah, it's just like yeah, anyway, so for me, like, I can listen to people talk about music forever. And just to say one other amazing episode is his interview with Tyler the Creator after Igor came out.
Oh,
What
okay. I
a
love Tyler, the Creator.
charming person who just he has the nicest way of loving his music so much, and unself-consciously, but also not arrogantly talking about it. And Igor's amazing. That album's amazing. I got into it through my teenager. Anyway,
No, I have
so
to
for
listen to this because I
you,
didn't know this, because I like Rick Rubin a lot. I've obviously, like, Def Jam is like massively influential and everything, but just
yeah,
as a producer,
yeah,
like, he's incredible. And it's funny because I probably did learn who he was probably from Behind the Music, or like
yeah,
MTV
sure,
News types of things like that. Like, which I wonder. I guess today it is YouTube, like YouTube documentaries and podcasts, but I do like wonder, like, how kids today are getting that kind of information, because on the one hand, we have more sources than ever, but on the other hand, you don't have these, like, well produced, in the sense that there's like a team behind them. Like, you have individuals who will do documentaries and stuff on YouTube, which might
yes,
be very interesting and are good, but it's not the same as when you
right,
have
right.
a production crew and paid researchers and people who can get
Well, it's
media rights and
usually
clearances.
yeah, and it's
It's just
usually
not the
such
same.
like repurposed. It's repurposed content, and if you've got a
Right.
gift for editing, that's great, and if not, it's a drag.
Right. Like
Um,
the kid who did like the extensive, like, ridiculous, like, in-depth looks and analyses of like the iCarly universe. Like, he is even limited in terms of like what type of clips he can show because of copyright claims and this and that.
yeah,
And he's done some original research, which is interesting. But again, it's not the same thing as if like the E2 Hollywood Story was still being made, or Behind the Music, or like those other types of things where you have a licensing group, like it's an
yep,
office who contacts people and gets what deals with rights issues. And it's not that
yeah,
expensive, but it's more expensive than what YouTubers could do. I mean, it's why I still prefer to watch Dateline. There are a lot of really good true crime, like, YouTube things, and some of them are really
hmm,
interesting and the analysis is good, but I would much rather watch Dateline. Why? Because there's just a level of polish there that's just better.
yeah, yeah, sure,
You know
yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like, it's just better.
yeah,
It's just better. But I'm glad we have podcasts like that. But I do wonder, and this is just my digression. My digression. I know we got to get into aptitude, and then you got to go. Like, how kids today are like discovering this sort of historical stuff. I guess it's YouTube, but I feel like it's actually. I
it's
hate being like,
it,
oh, it was better in my day, but I feel like it actually was.
yeah. For my teenage boys, I mean, they go deep dives in YouTube. I mean,
Totally.
and they come out of it with good shit. I couldn't watch those things all the way through, the ones that I see them watching, but like, man, they're getting good information. It's
No,
like
no, and it's not
they're
they're not getting
learning.
it. I just wonder. I'm just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
but it's not as, you know what I mean. But it's like, it's not as good. It's like Wikipedia. It's
Well, and
great
there's
that it's
not
got
as
everything, but it's not the same. It's
yeah.
not as good as Encarta or Encyclopedia Britannica was.
Yeah, and even if every media organization's fired all its fact checkers, you still got a better chance at a pretty factual thing sometimes in the news than you do.
Totally,
They
totally.
can go wrong. They can go wrong. And without, I mean, this is short, but I used to be an editor at New Reader magazine, and the purpose of that magazine was really pre-internet in a way. It was like to be a digest of the alternative press. And when I worked there, the definition of alternative press had sort of expanded. So we might have stuff from like the American Prospect or just whatever, like kind of political magazines that are actually doing pretty well. And we would always, if we were gonna reprint a feature, or even if we were gonna excerpt like 500 words from our article, we fact checked it. And the shit that we found in major magazines, in just trying to fact check 500 words of it, was chilling. And I feel like if that's when you're doing your very best, then if you're doing your YouTube documentary, man, you just got to be diligent. And I don't think anybody really knows to be that diligent, because it's more about the
No,
story a little bit.
it's about the story, and then it's also about feeding the algorithm, and you have like deadlines and things that are different. Like it's different levers pulling on you. Not to say
Right.
that you were lever
Definitely.
free with the old way, because you certainly were. To your point, you have people who are
Right.
going into Iraq with like a pre-written story or a pre-written outline in their mind, right? Like so
Yep.
it's
Yep.
not like that goes away, but it's just the levers are different.
Yeah,
All
totally.
right. Do you want to do
All right.
some Grapptitude? Do you have time?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's do
All
it.
right.
Do you want to go first? You want me to go first?
Do you have one?
I happen to, yeah. I'll be
Okay.
honest with you. It just came to me a minute ago, but
I mean, same,
I
to be honest,
have
but yes.
I have been using this app since maybe 2000. God, I feel like 2007, and that doesn't seem possible. But Devon Think,
Oh
um,
yeah.
which is like, it's basically the kind of thing where you can feed everything into it: your emails, your PDFs, your movies, your whatever, and it handles them all very well. It has its own built-in OCR, which works very well, and it has what it's been calling an AI for like more than for like decades. It feels like approach to being able to sort of organize or see across your files. It's not really AI exactly. It's certainly not as we understand it today, but when I have a big project and I'm at the point where I am now, I've had a project for about 5 years, and I'm at the point where I'm writing some sort of summative reports, but also some like public things. And I put everything in there, and it is the most incredibly powerful way to locate what I need. And I don't even have to be terribly thoughtful about how I dump stuff in. And it's what's nice about it is, in the beginning, I think it's true that in the beginning you just had to have your stuff inside of their walled off garden. But ever since they made it so that it just symlinks to files, basically. I think it's right to say that. But you can just have a folder and it acts on that folder rather than having to bring it into Devon, which means it gets all this kind of weird shit happening to it, or just like adds all these invisible files and all this stuff that just gets confusing 10 years later when you're trying to make sense of something. Anyway, it is incredible. Its ability, I've fed it as many as 20,000 PDFs in one project, and its ability to help me find my way through those PDFs was just like, it's almost like using BB Edit over like Sublime Text when you have huge data, where it's just like, oh, BB Edit is just waiting for me to give it something really big and challenging, whereas Sublime Text is like, no, that's not quite what I do.
Right.
And this is something that like in a period of time, this was an alternative to Evernote for me. But it really was so much more than an Evernote. There really isn't anything else quite like it in terms of I think what I like about it, it's probably my age, is it basically looks like an email interface for a classic email client. And I have always liked that format a lot. And so, yeah, Devon Think, I'm a Devon Think Pro fella, and I just love it.
Nice.
So much
Nice.
more
That's
to
a great.
say, but I don't need to say it.
No, that's a great pick. That's a great pick. So my pick is I'm kind of stealing from things that I have featured on the download. So sorry for people who
Perfect.
watch that, but
Also,
it's
watch the
good.
download. It's awesome.
Yes, watch the download. It's great. If I do say so myself. So this is called Heist, and this is a new and actually this is something that Brett would be interested in, because parts of this are open source. Like they've open sourced the like the kind of the compiler, kind of the syntax engine, but basically there were these college kids, these like computer science grads who became acquainted with LaTeX in college and realized that LaTeX is fucking terrible. And they're like, okay, so what if we fixed LaTeX? And you're like, okay, well, that would be interesting, but how are you going to do that? And so it's taken them 4 years, but they've written basically kind of a latex replacement, and they've open sourced. It launched like a couple weeks ago in beta, like in
Ooh.
public beta. So it's typst dot app, and they have like a web app that's free, and I'm presuming this is how they're going to try to like kind of make money with it, where you'll be able to like write and preview at the same time. But they're making the compiler open source, and they're open sourcing a lot of other stuff, so that, which honestly is the move here, because if you want this to actually take off as a format, this is what you do. And the
Yeah.
whole way they've been thinking about this and the formatting and the styling is basically how to like make something that will do what LaTeX does, but with a syntax that is not terrible.
Yeah. And this thing where they've got the split screen, like multi-markdown composer
Yep.
is really cool because the output is magical.
Yep. Yep.
It
And
looks
it's
it looks
great
so
because like
classy.
and they have like some built-in templates. Like they have this one that I just kind of created right now as we're talking, where it's like a newsletter sort of thing, and it looks like, obviously this is all done kind of in CSS and other sort of typesetting things, but this looks like the sort of thing that would normally be like a Word or maybe even like
Yeah.
a page mill,
Yeah.
to go back that far, like kind of template. And that's really great. But the thing is that you have like different text boxes with potential ways that you could do quotes, and then you have like math, the way that math things and numbers could be expressed in certain ways, and you have like
Yeah.
full control over your layout and everything else, and like that's really great. Like that's exactly what you want, but it's similar to Markdown in the sense that it's readable, and it I don't know the whole syntax yet, but it certainly seems a lot more accessible than LaTeX, which is incredibly
Yeah.
powerful, but is fucking awful. So
That's awesome.
Typest is my pick. And I'm also just amazed like that so many people have the idea, they're like, oh, this is terrible, I want to create a replacement, and then realize that it's hard and stop, and
Yeah.
that these
That's
are
hard
two
work. There's a
kids,
reason it's been dominant.
and these are two like college students who actually did the thing.
That's so cool. What a good story.
So yeah.
Awesome.
So that's it for me. But this has been a fun, like weird, like
Yeah.
Brett-free episode. Add we'll the show notes are going to be weird, but we should put in the podcasts for Rick Rubin and
Yes, I will put that stuff in, and Tyler the Creator too.
Tyler the Creator. And if you have any links to the gentleman, the Mother Jones and Rolling Stone guy,
Oh
is he
yeah,
still
sure,
alive?
sure. Yeah, he's still alive.
Well, no, I asked
Chuck
because
Sedetich.
Chuck
He's insane.
I asked because like not everybody did, like Michael Kelly, right? Like
Yeah, no, I know. Totally. Totally.
like
I mean,
it's gonna be
I
20
hear
years
you
like next
loud and
week.
clear.
I think it's gonna be 20
Yeah.
years next week when Michael Kelly died, which would
Yep.
like I remember
Yep.
that because like that was just like yeah, because he was like a journalism kind of like like big figurehead guy, and yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean,
Anyway.
this guy, he started doing work for the International Criminal Court and then became a
Oh shit.
ghostwriter for George Soros.
Nice.
He found his way.
Yeah, he did the International Criminal Court. Now that would be interesting
Totally.
place to work for, because holy shit, you talk about you talk about like the worst of the worst people, but also people who still deserve to have like rights. But
Yeah,
you're
sure. Yeah.
but you're literally talking about the worst of the worst people, and when you're talking about
Right.
the International Criminal Court, like
Yeah, it's a bad crew.
yeah, like the absolute like yeah. That's
like George W. Bush and all them. No, didn't happen that way.
No, hey, but Trump did get indicted.
I know. I'm waiting for the perp walk.
I know.
Told my wife this morning, I'm like, I don't even know that I want to celebrate it, but I kind of feel like I have to celebrate it. So
I mean, like he's never
celebrating.
gonna spend a day in jail. It's just gonna be like when Tom DeLay. Remember when Tom DeLay did his
yes
mugshot, and he was all smiling and whatnot for his for his OxyContin or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, the thing is 100 magazines have already created their own illustration of him in a prison jumpsuit and just throughout his presidency. So it's like, we're already just like desensitized to even that sight if it were to come.
Oh, and it was money laundering, not OxyContin. OxyContin
money
was
laundering.
OxyContin was Rush Limbaugh. back
Oh
before
yeah,
we
jeez.
back before we cared about the opiate crisis, and everybody was
Right.
just like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's
Yeah.
just a little pills,
Yeah.
um
Just the little pills.
just some pills. Okay, all right, well, this has been fun. It's been
Yeah,
a
totally.
fun episode. We missed Brett. We will have him back, but I always love talking to you, and I love hearing more about you. And yeah, you've
Same.
got a book. You've got a book in there that I would love to read.
And what do people do when they have books? They start podcasts.
This is true. This is true. You've already got the podcast. You've already got that promotional engine.
That's right. That's right. Nailed it. All right.
All right, get some sleep.
You get some sleep. We should say it more aggressively. You get some
Get some
sleep.
Go to sleep.
Why am I supposed to get sleep? Get some sleep.
The system is going down now.